Conor McMorrow reporting there, and as I say, we are coming to you live from Derry, where I've been joined by the Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams, and thank you for joining us after what was the highlight of the conference last night, your conference speech, and a real sense here in Derry this weekend that you're a party that's incredibly confident, incredibly united. You've got the mojo, and the polls are doing very well for you, particularly in the south. The issue for the party, though, is how do you translate the poll support and avoid the underperformance we've seen in your elections in the south again and again and again, particularly in terms of transfers, that brings you a couple of % short of what people might expect? Why is it going to be different this time?
Well, that's the challenge for us. You know, the election is the people's day. We will have a pre-run into this with the by-election in Carlow Kilkenny, where Kathleen Function is carrying the Sinn Féin flag. And I think the fact that we got such a good result in the locals and in the European elections shows that people who would vote 1 for us, other people would vote 2 and 3 for us. But I mean, I don't take any of that for granted. We have to be very, very humble. The fact is, some people are very cynical about politics. Other people think it doesn't make any difference. We need to enthuse those people. We need to go to them. We need to challenge them. And we particularly need to appeal to them that we are an alternative to what's happening at the moment. We're the only All-Ireland party, we're anti-austerity, we're pro-United Ireland, we're pro-business and we're pro-public services.
And that was your theme, make the change. But you are a party, as much as you have great support here in Derry this weekend and commitment from your supporters, you're also a party that divides people. You're also a party that many people, many voters, are afraid of. One of the things they're afraid of about Sinn Féin is that it's a party that's so united, that's so on message, that it would always put itself, its own interests, ahead of that of the state. Let's deal with that one first of all. The most recent example, I suppose, to bear that out would be the Maria Cahill case. Can Sinn Féin be trusted with government in that sense?
Well, first of all, it isn't the case. And it is also the case that that is the same for all parties. But it isn't the case that Sinn Féin cannot be trusted. There are people, if you paid them, they wouldn't vote Fine Gael. There are people, if you exhorted them, they would never vote Fianna Fáil or Labour. And there are people who would never vote Sinn Féin. We're in government in the north. We're also in government by dint of the North-South Ministerial Council with the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, who spend so much time beating up on us. We have challenges even as we speak. We're meeting in session here in Derry. Our call you met early this morning because we have to make sure that the Stormont House agreement is delivered. Martin McGuinness was up and down to Belfast in the course of this RDS. So of course we can be trusted. But again, that's up to us to persuade people that we are a party which is an alternative to what's going on at the moment and which will do things differently.
And the other big criticism that's advanced against you is the party's tax policy. For instance, the 7% extra that you put on salaries over a 100,000. The Taoiseach saying you're going to have to be increasing employers' PRSI and bringing in land taxes if you're to pay for scrap the water charges as you promised to do, and the property taxes. That Sinn Féin is a high tax party and it's going to cost the country and it's going to cost us growth and prosperity.
Well, we're a fair tax party. You know, 7 cents in every euro earned over 100,000. The Taoiseach doesn't have any problem awarding big bonuses and extra salaries in breach of the government's guidelines.
And will it definitely only be 100,000? Because I saw Desi Ellis on a constituency debate programme during the week, and he said, well, you know, if the yield from that wasn't enough, maybe we'd have to look lower. Maybe we'd have to look at 60,000 plus, that it wasn't being ruled out.
Well,
that's what people are afraid of with Sinn Féin.
We're very, very clear that those people who earn between 30,000 and 70,000 will have no hike in their taxes from us. We're also very, very clear by scrapping water charges, by scrapping the property tax, by giving people their entitlements, that we will not only help them, but we will also put money back into the economy. You see, this government believes that the people should serve the economy. We believe that the economy should serve the people.
But you can believe that all you like in a way. The issue is where the money comes from. I mean, that's the issue for the people of Ireland, the people of Greece, the people of Northern Ireland.
Okay,
the concern is that your fairer tax policies would chase money out of the country, would chase jobs out of the country and growth.
Well, 500,000 people, what a big tax base that is, have been chased out of the country in the last 8 years. Mostly young people, very well qualified people, some of them in low paid jobs here, that they left to go off to Canada and Australia and America and elsewhere. What we want to do in our vision of society is to look after those people, for example, children with disabilities, the ill, the people who are stuck on hospital trolleys.
Everyone
women,
wants to look
children.
after them in every party.
No, sorry, no,
the issue
everybody
is how
doesn't.
you pay for it.
No,
the issue is how you pay.
With respect, everybody doesn't. Because if you keep giving away the money that we give into bad banks, and remember, 191 people, they're the people who crossed the crash. They own 62 billion of the bank loan. And the people who are paying for that now are the people who didn't cause that problem and who can least afford to be part of the punishment that the government is heaping on them. So we see things in a different way.
And you do see things in a different way. And in Northern Ireland, you're implementing, you know, you call it Tory cuts, but there's £1 billion coming out of the budget this year. There's 20,000 public service jobs going. There's already hospital cuts. So you are capable in government of living within a budget and, in fact, delivering austerity.
Well, let me deal with your earlier question before I come to that, if I may. You see, the difficulty is that the people cannot afford the 1/3 of our children living in consistent poverty. That's the price. We just cannot afford this debt. Now, there are two things happening at the moment in terms of the North. One is, you quite rightly point out, that the British have taken 1.5 billion out of the block grant. And that is having an impact, and we are trying to ensure that people are protected from that, and that's been the effort of our ministers on an ongoing basis.
And that's been the effort of the coalition in trying to implement, you know, and sort out what they would say is the mess that they have inherited.
They rolled over. When the Taoiseach sailed into Belfast with the British Prime Minister for 24 hours for a sleepover, they wanted to impose austerity policies upon us. We said no. We stayed at another 11 days and we put together a package which was far, far better than the two governments envisaged. And it was about protecting people.
And Enda Kenny would say he's had a better austerity deal for Ireland, which we have now exited.
No, but with respect, exited was...
Which we have now exited.
Well, did we not have a report from our friends in the European Union last week coming in, and they're going to be coming in here for the next 40 or 50 years, and they told us, which we should already known about, that there's deeply ingrained poverty, that there are households here that have a generational unemployment, that there are all sorts of social inequalities and inequities. So it depends on what shape of society you want to build. And you won't do this overnight. We're not suggesting that this can be done overnight, but people want fairness. People want decency in terms of how we deal with folks who have to go to hospital. We have this awful situation that there are people who can't get into hospital beds, and there are people who can't get out of hospital beds because the government have not put the protection to allow medically discharged people to go home.
And in dealing with all of that, Syriza, of course, you've made great calls with. They've been a big hit at the conference here this weekend. But, you know, Syriza and their approach, you said, you know, the Irish government should stand up to Europe more, and Syriza has. Syriza still hasn't got the money that they need. Greece is a country that's running out of money.
Well, it's bigger than Greece. It's a European issue. Our government should have taken a stand. We didn't. We rolled over. We made private banking debt, private banking greed part of the sovereign debt. We've never asked for a retrospective write-down of the refunding of any of the pillar banks.
Michael Noonan said, in fact, that he did, and it was refused point blank. That the issue is the government that we have in the south, you know, hasn't liked austerity any more than you do. The difference between you is they said this is the best way that we can cope with the situation in Ireland, the terrible crisis that there was, and they would say that the growth we've got is now showing that they went the right way, and that Syriza in Greece won't deliver as they have.
I know you're only putting the provocative questions, but the fact is the record shows when I asked the Taoiseach, would he go and seek a write-down of this debt, would he negotiate on this debt, he said, time out of number, we will not have the factors, whatever term he used, stomped upon our foreheads. Defaulters. He wouldn't do it. He's now advising the European elites on how to deal with issues in other European states. It is
and based on the economic growth figures, the fall in unemployment, now down at almost 10%. Again, nothing to celebrate there for the 355,000 people who are out of work, but a lot better than it was. If Greece ends up defaulting and crashing out of the euro in the next couple of months, as it could well do unless they satisfy their European colleagues, won't Sinn Féin's solidarity with them and claim there is a better way look foolish?
No, because we're not Syriza, and this isn't Greece, famously, as the Taoiseach advised us one day. We know this isn't Greece, this is Ireland. The fact is, there's a better way of sorting these matters out. It has to be done fairly. Of course, the European elites will want to have their own way unless someone makes a stand against them. This government have not made a stand against them. Sinn Féin would make a stand. We would be sensible. We would pick our fights. We wouldn't just go in blindly. And what's it about? It's about trying to restore to those people who, as we sit here doing this interview, are in abject poverty. Those people who are going to lose their family home because the government gave the banks a veto. I could rhyme and reason to all the things the government did wrong in terms of putting the burden upon lower and middle income families and upon the poor. The inequalities have widened in the term of this government, and the government has embraced austerity. They had options. You look at every single budget.
I want to put one final question to you, sorry, because we are almost out of time. When you stood yesterday and sang the national anthem and you all turned towards the flag, and you had spoken earlier in your speech about we are orange in our flag as well as green, apart from the loyalist band, where is the orange? Because there's a lot of people, again, who are afraid that if in 2016 Sinn Féin is in power, north and south, as you're aiming to be, that they would feel excluded from this state, from your interpretation of our flag.
Well, our work goes on with people of the orange every single day. And with respect, this is a challenge not just for people who live in the north, it's a challenge for people who live in Sandymount, who live down in Cork, who live in Limerick. It's a historic challenge that we find a means of uniting orange and green.
A lot of people would never have predicted you'd have made it to that stage last night with that crowd there in the overflow room. Do you really think, final question, do you really think that Sinn Féin, that you could be Taoiseach next year, that Sinn Féin could be in government, could get enough support for that to happen?
Well, I don't think I'm going to be Taoiseach next year. That's number one. But number two, it's up to the people. But I do think that we are going to be in government on both states in the island, and we're going to use our political strength in both states in the island to bring about a better way for the people to govern ourselves, to bring about a fair way, and also to unite our people so that we end up getting rid of partition in a peaceful and democratic way. But I say it all the time, it's the people's gift. The people will decide on election day. What we want them to do is to consider Sinn Féin as an alternative to this very, very bad government.
Gerry Adams, President of Sinn Féin, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in Derry. And after the break, we'll be back with Brian in Dublin. Welcome back to the Week in Politics, and welcome back to Derry, where I'm delighted to be joined by two women political correspondents on International Women's Day. So welcome to Mary Minahan of the Irish Times and Sorcha Ní Riada of TG Cahir. And we'll start with you, Mary Minahan, as a Derry girl. There certainly is a buzz in this city this weekend, and there certainly is a sense, mingling with the delegates, that they're on a roll, aren't they?
Yes, there was definitely a very pumped up atmosphere, kind of foot stamping atmosphere at the Ardèche. I think you could liken it to maybe a Fianna Fáil Ardèche of some 30 years ago. I think the key thing with Sinn Féin is the parties that they describe as traditional now and representing what they call middle class voters are probably slightly embarrassed now to talk about nationalism, and Sinn Féin isn't embarrassed to do so. And their supporters, some people are uncomfortable with this, but they genuinely see themselves as a risen people, and they feel they're not alone anymore. They feel part of a broad sweep of change across European politics. Of course, they point to Syriza in Greece, and indeed they had a minister from the government there today. So I suppose, you know, one man's zealotry is another man's commitment. Some people are uncomfortable with that, some people aren't. The Greek strategy, or the following the Greek strategy, as you pointed out there in your interview with Gerry Adams, though, is a high-risk one. You know, we're just watching on and seeing what happens with the Greeks and whether or not their new government is successful.
Particularly when one of their reform measures seems to be Yanis Varoufakis writing to the EU Commission suggesting they'd have tourists running around trying to record tax evasion and collecting taxes for them that way. The other question, Sorcha Ní Riada, though, is however pumped up they are, however united they are, however much they have this sense of being a risen people, is whether they can translate that, if you like, first preference support into actual support in a PR general election, because this has been the issue for Sinn Féin to date. They have consistently underperformed.
That's very true, and it has been said about them that, you know, when you look at how well they're doing in the polls, that never transfers in the elections. But I think we saw a bit of a change in that in the European and local elections, that they did poll, that it was a bit closer to what had been predicted. But one of the things that struck me looking at this Ardèche was the age profile of both the delegates and the candidates that Sinn Féin have. And they're so media savvy, they make great use of the fact that, for example, Gerry Adams mentioned Kathleen Funchion in his speech. She's, of course, our candidate in Carlow Kilkenny. She was the first person up to congratulate him after the speech when the TV cameras were rolling. And even earlier on, when they were on air between 11 and 12, I think it was, they used that opportunity to give their younger councillors and so on a platform to put themselves in front of the people and make their speeches. And you had people like Rachel McCarthy, who's one of their candidates in Cork South West, and she spoke very well. And again, you could see how it provided them with this opportunity to make these people, to introduce them to the public and so on. So they are very media savvy in that way.
They are very media savvy, and that youth thing is something that struck you as well, Mary Minahan,
yeah,
isn't it?
very much so, and I think it is actually a factor in the question you asked, Sorcha, about why they've been overstated traditionally in opinion polls, because they've had a very strong youth support. Unfortunately, young people, traditionally at least, haven't been too good about getting up on polling day and going out to vote. I do sense that that is changing, though, with the increased politicisation of young people. There are a couple of other factors as well, and that's certain parts of the country, Sinn Féin isn't as organised as it really needs to be. Again, I think that is changing. And then really a third factor is they've been kind of toxic and transfer resistant. You know, for some certain cohort of Irish society, it's partly generational, but not exclusively. That party will always have a kind of a political BO because of its, you know, its past, its paramilitary
That's
past.
very gently put.
I think, again, that is changing. So just depends on whether or not those three factors that I've mentioned can change. And of course, the big message, I think, from Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams to the party faithful was that they can dare to dream that the party will be in power, not only in the North, but also in the Republic. And they made the audacious and quite contentious claim that that could happen as early as Easter 2016.
And indeed, in the interview, Gerry Adams was saying it is possible, yes, in 2016 that Sinn Féin would be in power. He believed, in fact, Sinn Féin would be in power, North and South, although intriguingly he said that wouldn't necessarily mean that he was Taoiseach.
Yeah, that was quite peculiar. We were just talking about that while he did that, and we were initially saying, well, does that mean that he's intending on standing down, or does it mean that he's reneging on this thing, what they've been saying about the fact that they won't go into government with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael unless they're the lead party, so to speak. But then if you look at what happened in the Northern Ireland elections when Martin McGuinness became the deputy leader of the Assembly here, so there has been some suggestion maybe that's what he was referring to.
It's intriguing, isn't it, Mary?
That is a very, actually, possibly quite a clever strategy, because it holds out the possibility that he could stay on as president for life. You know, I suppose we're getting into slightly Chinese leader territory at this stage. I mean, he has been in that position now for, is it 32 years?
As we saw in Conor McMorrow's report, all those faces who've come and gone in the meantime.
From the past.
But total loyalty to them.
Oh, absolutely. No, there's absolutely no question about that. But he is dangling out the proposition, I think, that he could stay on as president and have a separate person as Taoiseach if Sinn Féin really was to achieve this.
Yes, and maybe they'd also decide as well that that would mean, you know, that too many government compromises wouldn't come to play. The other big question, though, about Sinn Féin, and it's one the government, certainly the government parties intend to hammer, is this question of taxation and also the austerity measures in the North. Again, something intriguing in the interview, he said people earning between 30 and 70,000 have nothing to worry about. It suggests that 100,000 threshold might be a bit variable.
That's right. I mean, the element of his speech on that last night, we didn't really hear anything new. We heard the usual stuff about how they plan to abolish water tax, the housing charge and so on, and scrap the bank veto. But yes, he very much focused on salaries of over 100 grand. But in his interview with you, I did think it was very interesting. He talked about very much protecting people in the 30 to 70 bracket. But he kind of left a slight door open, I felt, for anyone earning more than €70,000. So that would be, you know, obviously cause for concern for people in that income bracket.
Yes, and it also suggests that the whole area of taxation is one that there's going to be an awful lot more scrutiny about. Fine Gael, for instance, talking about higher employers, PRSI under Sinn Féin, the possibility for land taxes and so on. So these are the kind of issues we're likely to hear an awful lot more about in the year ahead, because the attack is going to sharpen, isn't it? There's more at stake now.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I thought it was interesting, even during Gerry Adams' speech last night, Fianna Fáil were tweeting about this stuff, and they were saying, you know, watch out when you see Sinn Féin in government, we'll see a bigger inheritance tax and the third rate of tax, comparing it to going back to the 1980s and so on. And I do think that there is an issue about this wealth tax that Sinn Féin are speaking about, that a lot of people who would be living in the cities, who would have bought houses in the 60s or 70s, whose houses, albeit that we have had a drop in housing prices, but still, there are people who have houses that are worth a lot of money on paper, and they mightn't necessarily have the income to correspond to having a property at that value. And right throughout the country as well, you'd have a lot of farmers who'd have a lot of land that would make it appear that they're very wealthy on paper when you take the value of that land into consideration. And there will be a question for these people as to whether or not they'll have to pay a wealth tax on that. So I think that's an issue that they need to clarify.
And of course, the other issue in the final minute, Mary, that they're going to have to contend with now is austerity is beginning to be implemented in the north, even though according to Sinn Féin it's Tory cuts and it would be worse without them.
That's what the party will be hammered on by its rivals in the Republic going forward towards the general election. Gerry Adams made a brief but robust defence of the Stormont House agreement last night, but it was very short on detail throughout the whole conference. I think Declan Kearney, the chairman, was really the only person who came close to illustrating what would happen when these welfare cuts will be implemented. He's saying that the Sinn Féin in power is going to try and top up those welfare cuts through a reduced block grant coming in from Westminster. That inevitably means there will be cuts elsewhere, so there is going to be pain in the north.
And we've already heard Labour and Fine Gael politicians gleefully pointing to anything they can find by evidence of austerity in Northern Ireland under a Sinn Féin government, haven't we, Sorcha?
Oh, they have indeed, and it was significant at the Fine Gael conference in particular that they were trying to emphasise how fragile the recovery in the economy is and how important it is that we have stable government in order to protect that recovery and so on. And they're obviously alleging that if you elect Sinn Féin, well, you're not going to have stable government. And Gerry Adams did try to address that in his speech last night, you know, coming out with words like how Sinn Féin are pro-enterprise and supporting small and medium businesses and so on. Right. Things we never would have associated with Sinn Féin before, perhaps.
Well, ladies, we live in interesting times. Thank you very much indeed, Sorcha and Mary, for joining me on International Women's Day. And that's all from the week in politics. Thanks to the Ramada Da Vinci Hotel for the use of their facilities here. Thanks to all the crew in Dublin and in Derry. And until next week, from all the team, goodbye.